Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to get started. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon, sparing some of your time to have a very important conversation in Chesterfield County. We would like to thank the pastor of this church for allowing us to be here. Thank you so much. And our organizers, Chesterfield County Public Schools. We love Chesterfield County Public Schools. You can see the members of our group spread around the room in the red. And I would like to start by introducing our panelists this morning, or this afternoon. This is just the agenda we're going to follow so that you understand. We're going to have a short intermission as we transition from panelists from this conversation to the next conversation. So you'll have an opportunity to meet and greet our panelists after they're done. So the first topic is going to be about truth and education. And what we're focusing on in that conversation is about censorship. We're talking about book banning. We're talking about the inherently divisive concepts that our governor is scared of at the moment. And we're going to talk about disinformation. How do we prevent or control the spread of the truth versus the disinformation in our communities? Oops, excuse me, I went too fast. Our first panelist is Dr. Latorial Faison. She is a 27-year military spouse, 27-year military spouse married to Colonel Faison. He is joining us today. They have 3 sons. Dr. Faison's a poet, an author, an educator, and an independent scholar who currently serves on the faculty at one of our HBCUs, Virginia State University. Dr. Faison is a Southampton County, Virginia native. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in English Literature from the University of Virginia and a Master's in English Lit from Virginia Tech. Dr. Faison is also a published author whose writing and research focus on literacy, education, diversity, equity, inclusion, race, and culture. She has spearheaded and edited 2 junior anthologies in Virginia Public Schools and has spent the last 2 decades as a teacher, teaching artists promoting poetry, reading, and literacy, as well as providing poetry readings and creative writing seminars in schools and communities. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Latorial Faison. Our next panelist grew up in Princeton, West Virginia, and received his undergraduate degree in business administration from Concord College. He has graduate degrees in law from Washington and Lee University, library science from North Carolina Central University, and public administration from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He is currently the director of the Appomattox Regional Library System, headquartered in Hopewell, Virginia, and is the current chair of the Virginia Library Association for Intellectual Freedom Committee. Thank you. Meet Mr. Brian Manning. Our next panelist is Pat Hunter Jordan. She currently serves as the president of the Hanover County NAACP. She has previously served as a member, chairman, and vice president. Before retiring, she was a director of the USO at the Richmond International Airport. Her duties included overseeing the construction of the site, staffing, and securing of funding to open and operate the center for troops coming through the airport. As a retired vet, I always stopped at the VSO, so I appreciate it. She was elected as the first African-American woman district governor for Toastmasters International in the state of Virginia, and the first African-American woman international director elected to the state of Virginia, to serve the state of Virginia South through a portion of Texas. She is a mother of 2 sons, and she is also chairman of her outreach ministry at her church. Let's introduce you. Thank you, Pat Hunter Jordan. Too fast. Next, we have Dr. Greg Smithers. Dr. Smithers is a professor of American history, an eminent scholar at Virginia Commonwealth University, and a British Academy Global Professor at the University of Hull in England. His research focuses on Cherokee and Southeastern Indigenous history, as well as gender, sexuality, racial, and environmental history. His latest book is Reclaiming 2 Spirits: Sexuality, Spiritual Renewal, and Sovereignty in Native America. Thank you, Dr. Greg Smithers. And last but not least, we have Eden Hyman. She is the legal director of ACLU of Virginia, the statewide affiliate of the National ACLU, which is a nonprofit organization with approximately 2 million members nationwide, over 30,000 members in Virginia. Sorry. She has authored several publications and serves on the Virginia State Bar Special Committee on Lawyer Referrals. Prior to joining the ACLU of Virginia in 2018, Eden served as a staff attorney, senior supervising attorney, and managing attorney for the Southern Poverty Law Center in New Orleans, Louisiana, and as an attorney for the Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana. She received her law degree from Loyola University, her master's degree in social work from Tulane University, and a bachelor's degree from the University of Florida. She currently lives in Richmond with her husband, 11-month-old daughter, and 3 rescue dogs. Ladies and gentlemen, Eden. So before we begin, I would like to give each panelist an opportunity to open the floor and set the stage for the conversation. So we'll start with Dr. Smithers. It is sensitive, be careful.
Can you hear me?
Awesome.
Hey, I didn't know you were going to throw me under the bus there.
I'm not driving it.
Let me pull up my notes here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the invitation. It's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to see so many concerned members of the public, as we should be. There are big issues that we should be concerned about at the moment, and this is one of them. Thinking about this yesterday afternoon, I was mind cast back to a class that I started teaching about 15 years ago now that deals with the intellectual history of North America. And in thinking back on that class and the responses that students often have to that class is the sort of central point or the central memory that came up to me in thinking back on that was, well, why does this keep happening? Sort of these cycles of fear and hate and anxiety and targeting of particular groups. The students feel both, in the words of one of them not that long ago, ripped off that they didn't hear about this sooner in life, and also really angry that this keeps happening. Why is it that we don't seem to learn anything from the past? And so, sort of sitting with my dog, who, as I mentioned to one of my panelists, likes to come to my feet straight away when I call her, I was thinking about some of these moments and what they have in common with the current moment. And so I began in the 16th century. Right? I'm a historian, so I'm that guy you don't invite to the party because I bring up all these really antiquated ideas and events. And 1560s, right? Spanish colonialism, particularly Spanish priests, were burning Mayan documents in the 1560s because those sacred texts contained information that was contrary to Catholic doctrine and ideas in the 16th century. And in particular, in addition to targeting those texts, as I talk about in my most recent book, they were targeting people we know today as two-spirited, the knowledge keepers within many of these communities. They were targeting not only with silencing, but they were targeting with genocidal levels of violence. So this was the first example that came back to mind, talking to students about this. The second was from the 17th century in the 1630s and 40s, when in New England there was a whole slew of books that were published and banned. The first of which was Thomas Morton's The New English Canaan. Why was the book banned? Well, it contained information about the ulterior motives of some of the New England founders and their hypocrisies that they brought with them to the New World. Well, then I jumped ahead again a century into the 17th and 18th centuries, when there are attacks on Cherokee people throughout the Southeast. First during the Anglo-Cherokee War in 1759 through 61, and then during the Revolutionary War. Towns and townhouses were destroyed and razed to the ground, and documents were burned. And in fact, our National Library, the Library of Congress, contains within it, in fact, its first documents were stolen from Cherokee townhouses during the Revolutionary War. Jump ahead again into the 20th century, in the 1920s, and we have this immense anxiety about evolution and the teaching of evolution in classrooms in states like Tennessee. Many of you may be familiar with the Scopes monkey trials from the 1920s. And then my mind sort of flickered into the more recent period, and not that long ago, here in Chesterfield, when Rainbow Rowell's book attracted a lot of attention. Some of you in the room might remember this. Eleanor and Park, a 2013 book, was accused by Senator Amanda Chase of being pornographic. Vile, vile, nasty language, she said. God, that sounds familiar. Nasty. And then, to the very recent, our current time, in fact, the governor has until April 11th, and some of the other panelists may talk about this, SB 656, Siobhan Donovan, who's introduced a bill about sexually explicit content, which looks an awful lot like Florida's Don't Say Gay law that recently passed. And so I'm going through all of these, flipping through the centuries here, and I'm like, what does all of this have in common? And I'm an Indigenous historian, and the thing that struck me again and again and again, within their own particular context, is the anxieties and fears that large segments of white people have. As one Native elder recently told me, white people keep taking our stuff and then trying to kill us. And that seems to be a recurring theme over and over and over again throughout the centuries. And there are different reasons for that within their particular historical context, which I'd be happy to address. But this seems to be one of those moments then that we're in right now. This great fear of sharing power and knowledge and the distribution, the fair distribution of wealth and social justice measures seems to be of incredible concern, and people are lashing out in this particular prejudicial way.
Thank you, Dr. Smithers. That's a great opening. That gives a great segue for Eden to give us her thoughts on the opening thoughts. So it should just be opening thoughts on the subject of the censorship or the divisive concepts.
I thought I was going to be left. I'm kidding. I thought you were going to work your way this way.
I am. So just coming to you.
That's a hard act to follow over there. You know, I have a few thoughts I wanted to kind of just start opening with, which I think to put a lot of this into context. You know, I'm approaching this as a lawyer, not as an academic. So first I want to say, like, Virginia is in a very unique spot. I moved here about 4 years ago from Louisiana, and I think one of the things that surprised me initially about Virginia was how politically charged it is, probably more so than any other place I've lived in my life. And I think the reason why, for whatever reason, is that Virginia is right now kind of ground zero for a lot of the culture wars happening across the country. And I think the idea is that the narrative that wins in Virginia can win the narrative for the country, right? We are the bellwether, if you will, for the rest of the nation. And that's a lot of power to have in one state, right? And so that also puts a lot of importance on the work that we do here to make sure that that if there are, you know, strategies and things that happen here, we try to, you know, to nip them in the bud before they replicate and you know, spread throughout the country in a way that causes more serious damage beyond just in our state. So that's one issue I want to kind of quickly flag is really where Virginia is and the role of Virginia in this piece. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the law on these issues. They are constantly evolving. You know, I think it's nice to think about. We have a lot of people who will write to us for intakes at the ACLU, and they'll say, you know, this is happening and it violates my constitutional rights. And I'm like, oh, I wish everything was as clear cut as that. It's usually not. the law, even on book banning, is very unclear. The last major ruling on book banning by the U.S. Supreme Court was back in the 80s, and it was what's called a plurality opinion, meaning there was no majority opinion on it. They had to have several justices kind of concurred with each other to come up with a finding on it, but it is not considered a majority opinion. So as of right now, the law on this stuff is really murky, and what that opinion came to the conclusion with is that you can't ban things for content, right? Like it can't be because the school dislikes the content of it, but they can ban it if they feel like it's inappropriate for the audience, right? Which is where we get into some of these discussions about, oh, well, what about sexually explicit material? Well, if you take something out of context in the book within which it's in, very often you might read something in a Toni Morrison book or in a Kurt Vonnegut book and say, oh, well, this is horrible, because it's taken out of context. It's not part of the larger historical piece and literary piece of that novel and that work. And so it's a real concern to see that, and it's really concerning because the law is not it's not going to protect a lot of this unless we do things to make it so. So, for example, I think that's where the role of our lawmakers in the state is so important. As most of y'all know, our federal judiciary, our Supreme Court, is going more and more conservative, which means they may be less and less likely to protect certain issues involving some of these matters as it goes up. Some of our district and appellate court benches are also conservative. And so as we kind of look at each General Assembly session and the laws that come up, we need to be very, very vigilant and make sure that we stay on top of our lawmakers to ensure that, that we are not passing laws that really hold us back and potentially hurt these issues. And the last thing I wanted to quickly say, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is I do think folks, that we are losing the narrative on this. And I mentioned this earlier to a few folks. For whatever reason, like the concept of parent rights and parent choice has been co-opted by the other side here. And so it's really hard to argue about the merits of reading literature when someone else is yelling, but I'm a parent and I have rights. And of course a parent has rights, right? Like that feels like we're all shouting into the wind together. And as a parent, I have rights. I have a right that I want my child to be exposed to these works of literature, right? Or these other concepts. But like why did we lose that narrative? And I think that's something that we need to talk about and get on top of so that we're not playing the defensive game, which I think, we have been on these issues for so long.
Eden. Ms. Pat Hunter-Jordan, your opening thoughts on censorship and the divisive concepts.
Thank you so much for having me. Thinking about both the statements offered here, we see so much of this in our work. Our work is social justice. Our work is environmental justice. Our work revolves around criminal justice. And the intersection of all of that, we have begun to see, is fear. And we look at that and find that that's the basis of most things that we see. The people in power are afraid of losing their power, simply to be fair to others. And when we confront this, we hear, well, Christians would not love transgender, this is just not Christian. And then we have to go back and say to them, if you truly read your Bible, then you would understand that God said he loves all people and he made no mistakes. And getting that point across to them is difficult because they want to take their personal stand no matter what truth is. And so we know that that comes out of fear. Because when you can stand before a school board and say that our children are getting beat up in the bathroom by transgender kids, but if you look at the statistics, transgender kids are the ones being targeted by the other kids. But they don't want to hear truth. And so lots of times, just telling the truth doesn't help. We ask to sit down. Let's have a conversation. Let's share they don't want to do that with us, because the talking points that they've been indoctrinated to present would then be null and void. And so we fight that, the banning of the books. We actually read one of the books they wanted banned to them, to our board, to say, what is so wrong? You believe in the Bible, and everything that's in the Bible is worse than what's in this book. So tell me what is wrong here. The only thing in this book that you want banned is because it has a picture of a sword on it. And you're saying that is too violent for your 5-year-old to see. And pardon me for my allergies are killing me. But we fight those concepts and those things. And as Eden says, we cannot allow them to take over the narrative. Because, yeah, your kid has a right, just as mine does. And so I have a right to allow my child to read those books that you want banned. So we don't ban them from the library. We leave them in the library. When your child brings a book home that you don't like, you send it back to the library. You know, there's simple results and things that we can do for this if we are talking to people who want to be reasonable. And so those are the things that we are continually struggling with, and the places that we have to go to fight this battle that we see on a daily basis.
Thank you, Ms. Hunter-Jordan. Dr. Latorio.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm trying to figure out where I want to jump in here. I think I'm going to go to the term divisive concepts, because that term, to me, you know, to be wielded so freely by a state leader, I'm going to ask everybody in the room to, at this very moment, if you have a child, if you have a grandchild, if you have a niece or a nephew, I want you to think, what is the one thing that that child needs that you would like for your child to get when they walk into a classroom, whether it's K through 12 or whether it's a higher education classroom? Think in your mind, what is the one thing that you need your child to be provided when they go into a school? Everybody has a thing or two or three. But the next thing I want you to think about is, what if that one thing that your kid needs, your governor calls it a divisive concept? As a black woman who's 48 years old, who has grown tired at 48 of explaining what black people need, explaining what I need, talking about what I did not get, but for the great teachers that I had growing up in Southampton County, predominantly, you know, black teachers. Black students need race, identity, culture intertwined in their educational experience. And for our governor and our leaders and our voters to decide that the one thing that a black child needs is divisive, it's not surprising, it's historic, it's traditional. They have never, the powers that be have never put any kind of real reform in place for African American students. I have researched it. I've gone down the list of reforms, the various acts and laws that have been put in place, but none of them have been put in place to directly address African American students. We have laws that have been, and reform that have been put in place for Native Americans. We have laws that have been put in place for Jewish Americans. And when we think about it, I think it was Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg who said, anywhere decisions are being made, women need to be at the table. And in the same respect, anywhere education decisions are being made where African Americans are being concerned, African Americans need to be at the table. And it's the same with, you know, various ethnicities and different types of groups that have been disenfranchised and discriminated against. In terms of these divisive concepts, it's the narrative, it's not new. What it is it's racism. It's blatant racism. And we can tiptoe around this issue of we don't want our children to feel like this burden is theirs. We don't want our children to be aggressively attacked. Black children have been aggressively excluded since the beginning of time. I mean, I could write my own book about the things that happened to me. And I'm going to recall one simple instance. You know, I'm raising 3 sons. I've raised 2 of them, 24, 23. I've got a 14-year-old. My 14-year-old has had maybe 1 black teacher in his whole life. In 2021, over 70% of the teachers in public schools in America are white and female. 7% are black. How do we get more black people in education? 1, we hire them. 2, we pay them. Education is not a field that pays. And then in counties like Chesterfield, sort of upper echelon types of counties, we need to hire and recruit more African American teachers. It is important, research proves it, it is important for a black child to walk into school and see someone who looks like them. Whether it's principal, whether it's teacher, whether it's aide, it's important. So I want to think in terms of identity development. Coming out of a period of 400 years of slavery, chains and slavery, and I won't get into all the specifics of what happened to black people in slavery. We know the story. We know that narrative. That's the narrative they don't want us to talk about. That's the truth they don't want to tell. And we have got to stop lying to our kids. We got to stop lying to black kids. We got to stop lying to white kids. We have to stop lying to all kids, because it is an utter disgrace for a child to leave K through 12, get to college, and for the first time ever be confronted with race, be able to actually talk about it. It's a disgrace for African American students to have to get to college and find out a little bit more about themselves. I have been teaching since 1998 as a military spouse all over this nation. The narrative is the same. The only place the narrative has not been the same is when I'm teaching at an HBCU. And I believe it was the late Julian Bond, who was an amazing attorney, lawmaker, activist. He said for a black child to do 12 years of school and come out with 6 years of education, that's the worst possible lynching. I'm seeing the worst possible lynching in college when students get there and they don't know their history. They don't know who they are. So for African American students, getting to an HBCU, getting to a college classroom, that's too late. And I love to call on my elders, because we all know that that's how we got here. We got here riding on the backs of other people who were smart enough and who were brave enough to keep pressing the issue. So we can't just fold up now and act like this is not happening. Because if we fold up and act like this is not happening, even my 48-year-old black tired self talking about racism, I can't stop talking about it. You know, it's impossible to be black and not be frustrated a lot of the time in America, because I don't think there's been a single day where I woke up where I didn't have to think about it. So what privilege is that for the rest of the world, the rest of the white world, to be able to get up every day and maybe just think about poverty, maybe just think about how I'm going to eat. But for a black person to get up every day and think about all the complexities of life, and on top of that, that be compounded by color, by race. So this is a very real conversation that we need to have, because what they are fighting, I've penned 3 books titled 28 Days of Poetry Celebrating Black History. It's a 3-volume collection. The first one was published back in, I believe, 2006. Maybe I might be wrong on the year. But the idea of creating those books was to be able to go into public schools, not just for little black girls and boys, but for everybody. And when I have gone into those schools for the last 15, 20 years, I have been welcomed by black teachers, white teachers, Asian teachers. We lived in Korea for 2 years. I took it there. When I'm in those schools, young people are eager to learn, no matter what color they are. They are eager to hear the truth. Some of these kids that are coming up are brighter than their parents know and realize. Truth be told, they have a little bit more sense than the adults who are making the rules. But you know, it is very important that we are included and that we're including everyone. So diversity, equity, inclusion, you know, it lumps in all groups, but my advocacy is still for the group of the African Americans. And we know what the black community looks like. I'm not a person who shies away from what black community looks like, what's happening in black community with the addictions. We can look at the 80s when crack ravaged black communities. If we look at that, this is a real story that we need to be talking about. In the 80s, crack ravaged black communities. And in the last decade, crystal meth has ravaged white communities. And I remember driving down through my county in Southampton and seeing all these get help if you have a crystal meth addiction. And we know why we see them, just like the signs that are out here saying Black Lives Matter, because finally an addiction is killing rich white kids. Where was that help? I'm going to say it because black people are always the last to get help. If something's going down in the community, we are suffering it the worst. So this target, these divisive concepts, it's really about us. It's really about race. Members of the LGBTQIA community are in there, but who will suffer the most if these leaders and this platform is able to pass? It's going to be the African American. And I'll stop right there for the moment.
I'm so sorry that you have to follow Dr. Latorio.
I must switch. I'm so happy that I get to be last. No, it works.
Here you go.
There we go. Whoa. I'm Brian Manning. I'm the director of a public library, but I'm here as the chair currently of the Virginia Library Association Intellectual Freedom Committee. So first, let me speak generally about libraries. In 1939, the American Library Association came out with its Library Bill of Rights. 1939, you understand the history, I hope, of how divisive and how destructive many cultures were in destroying ideas or silencing voices of minorities as well as coming under attack. So 1939. Last year, the American Library Association also came out with its statement on diversity and the right of people to have access to different opinions, and I can share those statements with you. I had to think about what I wanted to say in this conversation, and what came to me was lines from a Mary Chapin Carpenter song. Libraries want something in their collection that make you cry until you can laugh. They want something in the collection that can make you laugh until you cry. We want something that will inspire you to take action and something that will make you zone out and shut down and let the world pass you by for a while. Above all else, we want to have information in some resource either we can provide to you or we can get to you that helps you prove a point, disapproves the point that you want, approve of taking action, show your disapproval, whatever, inspire you to do or act or think. I worked for someone who made the comment, there should be no penalty in life for thinking. And so the pendulum in that situation swings both ways, and I'm not going to apologize for either side. In my own personal life, I can march, I can petition, I can vote, I can take action, but as a library, I want to provide a balanced collection that answers everything. And you can agree with it, disagree with it. Someone said check it out, don't check it out. I don't want anything in the collection that is confrontational. but controversial as in controverse, creating an open discussion and a debate and a give and take so we can realize which way we want to go, you betcha. Provocative as in provoking you to think, to take action, that's what I want you to do. Where those pieces go in a library, whether it's in nonfiction, political opinions, science, or fiction, and a lot of what I've heard in the last several years is pure fiction, and yet it's accepted as fact. And I want to provide, the library wants to provide you relevant, reliable information on those topics. And it is, so long as it's an open debate, there's information on both sides. And I will put both opportunities in your hand, and you can decide which way you want to go. Now, because this relates to schools, I would be not well liked if I did not speak that my wife inspired me, encouraged me to go into libraries. And she was a youth services librarian. And for part of her career, she was with the public library as a children's librarian. She ended her career before she retired with a community college. In between, she worked as a school librarian at an elementary school. And let me tell you that all the principles that I just addressed as to how a library should have the information someone wants applies to school libraries, plus the school librarians I've known work themselves to death. The comment, other duties as assigned, takes on a whole new meaning with all the things that my wife had to do as a school librarian. And she had to fight for time for the children to come to the school library. Oh, and they can only come after they arrive on the bus before school starts, or they have to come after school's over, but they got to make the bus. When you have classes in your library, teach them how to use the library, but we're not going to give them a chance to come. So you want a school librarian and the school library to do all I said with relation to the student body at that school. But the school library shouldn't, and I would not support shying away from that other side of the conversation. If all we're going to have is one side of the conversation, that's not a library. It needs to be both sides so people can go back and forth and learn from each other and develop opinions. That's it.
Thank you. Listening to all of you in your opening statements, I heard a common theme regarding fear, right? That some of the ideas behind book banning or parental choice or the disinformation stems from a level of fear that the community is feeling. The fear that we're taking their choices away. That's why they're screaming parental choice. They're trying to exercise their freedom of speech, but someone would say it's hate. We allow hate speech. So, your perspective in the areas that you're working in, your opinion on how do we combat the fear, and that's not an answer, but that is a problem that we have, right? The linchpin for what is driving these conversations, because at these school board meetings, General Assembly, our passionate parents who truly believe that what they're saying is the right thing to do. Like, they truly believe that their child is going to come home crying because the literature made them feel bad, right? And the conversation is not being had, to Latorial's point, about how does that black child feel? That when you start the conversation in class, you start telling my child that their history begins with slavery. And we know that's not true, right? So now the parents have to become teachers. Now we have to educate our children ourselves, as opposed to letting the public institution that we're trusting and paying for to do so is failing. But if we can combat the fear, so just a little bit of your thoughts, whoever would like to go first, on how do we combat the fear? Because I think that's the essence of our problem right now. Brian.
As I ended. Again, from schools, the whole point of teaching, going back to my wife, every year or so there'd be a new acronym and a new theme of how they were going to educate the children. But in the most recent years, it's always come down to critical thinking, that we aren't supposed to teach by rote, memorize this, and that's the answer, and go with it. They're supposed to be able to look at concepts from the early age all the way, certainly through high school. And by the way, I hated being a team player in group projects. But working together to come up with the final solution requires us to have the open conversation back and forth. So yes, people are going to get upset about different things, but I can't remember which of this panel mentioned, certain groups are cherry picking this page or this word or this look, and from a library perspective, of a intellectual freedom perspective, you have to look at the whole body. Now, does that mean everything belongs in a library? No, because some stuff is crap. But you want to buy quality or provide quality information that has that whole story. The whole body of the work needs to start that conversation, and I'm sorry, parents have to talk to their children. Parents have to have this conversation and not silence the conversation because it makes you feel bad or makes you feel icky. I do not have children. I know that if I had children, they would have been perfect. They would have put all your children to shame. But the thing is, you need to occasionally talk to your children. What did you learn? And here, this is not a speaking of social society or in general, but we've lost a lot of that opportunity of sitting down with the dinner table. What did you learn today? What would you talk about? I can't help it. How you get to meet your children, interact. I can't get my nephews to stop texting me when they're just 2 feet away from me. So, but we have to have that conversation, even if it does upset us somewhat. I'm sorry.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
I'll add to that. For me, we dispel fear early on in life. If we wait, it becomes more difficult. And so I've talked to a lot of our white allies and said, yeah, you're allies now, but when you have your outings with your kids, how many black children are going with you? When you have your big dances, and one of the things that I brought up, and a couple of them I think got upset with me, but you have your big dance because it's COVID and the school can't have a dance. So you rent out your country club and you had your dance. How many people of color, students of color, did you invite to be there? And so you've got to teach your kids when they start young that this is the world that we live in. It is not a separate world where you have all your white friends and you do all of these things where you say, I'm an ally. And I believe, and I'm going to teach my kids that they should be fair. But we teach through demonstrating what we're saying. So we can say all we want, that we should be fair. But until we show them through every aspect of our life, and we who are Christians, we are the biggest hypocrites at that. I'm a Christian. I can say that. Because at 11 o'clock, you're at your white church, I'm at my black church. Okay? So until we stop, we put those barriers down, then that fear is going to remain there. And we've got to become intentional. That's my buzzword for the year. We've got to become intentional about these things. So everything I do, I've got to sit there and say, okay, am I including these people? We're running a bus trip to the African American Blacks in Wax Museum. And so I've specifically said to our allies, this is not a trip for black people. It's a trip for all of us so that you too can begin to understand. Even if your kid doesn't, you as a parent need to go with them. So the explanation is going to be there. so that you can answer the questions. And so that's a lot of where I think we can begin to attack this fear issue. And as long as we say it doesn't belong in schools, we can't talk about race, we can't do this, then the cause is lost. We're just going to keep on repeating same things we've done. As we continually tell Hanover County, we had to take you to court to desegregate. We had to take you to court to change school names. We got to take you to court for trans kids. When are you going to stop wasting money and just do the right thing? So that's what when fear controls. And we've got to stop back and start being bold and let people know we're no longer going to take this. We're not going to just sit back and let things be as things have been.
Thank you. Go ahead, Eden.
Piggyback off of that really quick, because I get the sense we're probably preaching to the choir here. I think the vast majority of folks in this room are probably pretty like-minded in terms of wanting the exposure of information. But when I think about like the arguments in fear, I think about even fear among the community which we are. So when people say, oh, you know, we can't let schools teach critical race theory, the average person on our side says, they don't teach critical race theory in elementary school. That's the argument back, right? Or they don't teach critical race theory in high school. What about, what's wrong with critical race theory? I want my child to know what redlining is. I want my child to understand these experiences. If they don't, they're getting an incomplete education, right? So we're making the wrong arguments. And I think, so fear isn't on both, I mean, it's on both sides. It's not just on the side of folks who are trying to shut down the discussion. It's also on the side of people who are trying to rebut the discussion, right? By trying to like deflect and say, oh, don't worry, you don't get taught critical race theory until you're in college or law school. Like, well, no, you know what? We should be teaching critical race. Do you know what critical race theory is? And B, like, why is that wrong? I mean, I laughed at watching Ted Cruz read Anti-Racist Baby. I read it to my daughter every night, and I still don't understand what's wrong with the book. I'm like, what is, I read it again last night to be like, I am at a loss. There is nothing in that book to me that is controversial or should be controversial, right? Like, these are discussions we should be having with every child, starting from when they are an infant. Well, you had like posters of it up in the, you know, it's now the #1 trending book on Amazon, which is, you know, great. But I mean, I think, again, I think we need, because we are all like-minded, and we're not, you know, we're not here to, I'm not changing any of y'all's mind. You all agree probably with this, the general concept that we're speaking about. But I do think the way, you know, folks are responding to these arguments is probably helping to contribute to that culture of fear. So as opposed to saying, no, don't worry, critical race theory isn't being taught in school, like you shouldn't worry about that, I think we really need to dig down and say, you know what? It should be. Like, it should be taught from a very early age. Like, the idea of exposing a child to the systems and structures of our country and how they are failing people of color, especially black people, is something that needs to be taught as early as possible.
So that leads into the next question about the inherently divisive concepts, right? So our governor has published executive orders where EO 1 and 2 that calls out specifically that we will not address inherently divisive concepts. And he gives some examples, poor examples, because we all know Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln did not have that conversation. So we need to check who his history teachers were. But in there, he's explaining examples of things that he views that could be considered inherently divisive. And so to Dr. Littorial, if you don't mind expanding a little bit about how do we know it's not divisive, right? So instead of just defining it for what it is, analogies, pictures, we need to come up with another way to take the narrative back that this is not divisive, it's informative. Right? This is not divisive, this is education. This is not divisive, this is the sake of our children, the future of our Commonwealth, for those of us here. How would you approach the conversation of breaking down the barriers to this divisive concepts that he's concerned so much about?
I'm going to lean back into the last question just a little bit, because it's all, we use the word fear, but for me it's not fear. It's indoctrination. It's indoctrination. If we go back to the early Jim Crow civil rights movement, all of those people had been indoctrinated. Okay, you've had all these years of slavery, and you've been taught, most white people had been taught that black men were lazy. You couldn't have your daughters and your children around them. So you have that indoctrination, and then you don't want your child to mix and mingle with that. That's kind of what we're seeing today, and that's what the fear is. It's the same fear that perhaps this group is going to rise up. And I think, I don't know what goes through a white racist. I mean, I have not written that poem yet. A friend of mine has written that poem. He likes to do persona poems where he pretends he's someone else. I cannot write that poem yet, but we have to definitely, have the conversation about what race is in this country. It's been the elephant in the room, and I'm just simple. We call a spade a spade. Racism is not just KKK. Racism, let's go back to how we ended up with the textbooks that we had. Exactly. The South won, the South lost. They think they won. The South lost, and as a trade-off, we get the daughters of the Confederacy writing our textbooks. Okay, now let's fast forward to you had. Nobody wants, in terms of indoctrination, it's not fear, it's indoctrination, okay? I was raised by my grandparents, okay, who did not graduate from high school, okay? They did the best that they, and might I add, they did an amazing job. But not everything they told me. It's that simple. Not everything that our forefathers taught us, provided for us, the systems that they put in place, not every system that we have in America was designed with the freedom, liberty, and justice for all. That's where we have to get to. We have to call our founding fathers what they were. We are suddenly, for example, I'm a graduate of UVA, and I love UVA with all my heart. I really do. I could live on that campus. I love UVA with all of my heart. I spent 4 years there. That place changed my life for the better. And it was not the education that I received in books. It was the diversity that was there. It was the ability for people to come together and freely think and have this conversation for the first time about race and diversity. We need to bottle what is happening on college campuses and let that permeate through K through 12 in appropriate ways. I felt like we were headed toward that. Young lady down here has talked about white allies, okay? Everybody knows black people wouldn't be free without white allies, freedom fighters, freedom riders, people who worked on the Underground Railroad. That Underground Railroad still exists. And I want to thank every white person in the room, because if you are here, you're an ally. If you are here, you are a freedom fighter. This is what has to permeate. It's not our children or the people in the room that we're worried about. It's how do we reach these other people. Frederick Douglass had a quote that went something like this: "It's easier to raise strong kids than to repair broken men." This challenge that we face today, it's twofold. We have a task on how we're going to deal with the nation's kids. K through 12, that's our responsibility. I just told you my grandparents did not have a high school diploma. They trusted that my education system was doing the best it could to educate me. And I dare say Southampton County Public Schools did a great job, because I went to 3 of the best universities in Virginia. That's what we're facing. How do we deal with the kids? How do we deal with these grown-ups? Now, I don't know if Frederick Douglass would say, forget the grown-ups and let's deal with the kids. And that's why we're here. But when you have parents who are at school board meetings yelling and irate and really setting an example that is unbecoming to their own children, I don't know how we combat that. In terms of our governor, and I know this is being streamed live, he is either ignorant or being ill-advised. How do you make it this far? You know, and there's some part of me that thinks, like our last president, that he's playing with his own constituents. And that's a terrible thing, because I don't like for this to get lost in the discussion. I like to tell people that, you know, I know you hear a lot about African Americans and LGBTQI people, and we're always talking about what we need and what we want, but there is a group that also does not get support. That's the white poor group. The white, poor, uneducated group. And if we can get to that group to let them know that their cause is our cause and our cause is their cause, and that they cannot allow politicians to use them, to take advantage of them. And that's education, that's literacy, that's, you know, we've got to find a way to reach that group. And it's talking, it's in our neighborhood. And I know we go to our own little spaces and we kind of don't want to deal with these people because, as I said before, I'm black and tired. But if you keep inviting me to these events, I'll keep showing up, because that is how I was raised. Black people have had to have conversations with their children. You know, if Ruby Bridges, I think there was a meme going around, if Ruby Bridges was old enough to experience it,
You're old enough to learn about it.
everybody else is old enough to learn about it. And I, you know, from the time I grew up, I can remember my grandparents teaching me that you got to do this, you have to do this as a black person. It's very real when black parents teach students like, or people like Ketanji Brown Jackson, like, what's the big deal with her, okay? We're not going to waste time trying to help people understand what the big deal is, because good, conscious people know what the big deal is. Good, conscious people know what it's been like, if you've been paying attention, if you've read any good books, if they've been allowed in your child's school, if they've had any black teachers. They know what the big deal is. And not only do they know what the big deal is, they want to know. So that group that I mentioned, they don't want to know. It's not fear, it's indoctrination. No one, I mean, the biggest thing with those statues was we removed those statues and our forefathers, that history is gone. It means that we have to admit that we lost. This was a fight for the nation. The Civil War was a war about fighting for the nation. Freedom and justice for all. That's what we're up against right now. This is a war for the nation. Do we want the numbers of our unlearned public to grow? Or do we want to start teaching? So sounds like we not only have K through 12 to combat, but we have higher ed to combat. We have vocational education to combat. You know, I talk this talk all the time. I'm not afraid to talk race talk. You cannot be afraid to talk race talk. Because what I know at the end of the day is nobody can tell me the experiences that I have had. I could keep you up all night telling you how some white person tried to disenfranchise me. 4th grade, white woman walks into my classroom. She asked my teacher, Miss Tabor, who I still remember, a black female teacher, she says, I'm not going to call a person's name, but she says, I need this student. My black teacher says, okay, what do you need her for? My black teacher knew what she needed her for, okay? Because this is the gifted coordinator for the county. She walks into this classroom in a county where the students are 50% black, and she says, I need this one little white girl. And my black teacher says, well, we have several students in this classroom who need to be tested. Several, black and white. As a result of that, I'm in the gifted program, and we all know what happens in the gifted program. These kids get exposed to so much more, you know. But had that teacher not stood up for me, and there have been times where white teachers have stood up for me. You know, I'm 48, but I had one of my white teachers, my white biology teacher, took a screenshot of a letter that she wrote for me when I was applying to UVA. I got emotional. She was a white ally. So we have to, black allies, white allies, team up. And we, you know, I always feel like it's my responsibility to educate other African Americans. We need white people to educate other white people. That's the bottom line, okay? Because we're going to keep doing this all day long, okay? I'm tired of arguing. People are tired of arguing. But we need white people to go into those communities and pockets of indoctrination and hate and racism. It's hard work. You know, every semester at VSU, I ask the students in my classroom, by show of hands, raise your hand if you feel like you represent your race. You're responsible for your race. Around the new millennium, I start to see black students not raise their hand. And I'm like, how dare you? But they don't know. They haven't been educated. They don't know their history. So it's the same thing with white people and other people. They don't know. And that's the big question. How do we get them to know? How do we teach them? They should have been invited here today. They should have been invited here today, whether they came or not. They should have accepted an invitation. So how do we get them to accept an invitation, Dominique? That's the conversation we've got to get ourselves past. And I want to go back to, I talked about Governor Youngkin, and I've been praying. I remember when President Trump took office. I was teaching in Northern Virginia at Northern Virginia Community College, and many of the students cried the day that Hillary Clinton lost. And I remember my first election when I voted in high school, and they cried. I had Trump supporters in my classroom, but the students who voted for Hillary, they cried. And I'm like, guys, this is just one election. You got to get back in there and, you know, keep voting, keep reading, keep studying. But I was praying that I was praying that President Trump would somehow be a great president. I really did, because I'm like, we have him now. Maybe he'll surround himself by great people, and this thing will be good. We all know how that went. I'm praying the same prayer for Youngkin. You know, I'm waiting for him to say, okay, I played a joke on you guys. I just need to get your votes. It's not going to happen. And so we have got to spend the next 3 years reaching Youngkin voters. So for all the mediators in the room, all the peacemakers in the room, all the peacemakers out there, that's what has to happen. Maybe a child shall lead them. I don't know. Maybe we need to start a child coalition like they did when King was marching back in the 50s and the 60s. There were children who actually marched. Maybe that's what we need to do. But something has to be done so that we can reach the people on the other side.
So that's thank you, Dr. Latorio. So that's to wrap up that first segment. Like that's what we're hearing is the indoctrination. The fear comes from the indoctrination, right? We're hearing that we want parental choice in the libraries. That means all books should be in the libraries, so that you do have a choice. Because if there's only one kind, that's not a choice. We understand that we got to continue to fight, and we need everyone in the room to fight. So whether we're preaching to the choir or not, what the onus is on the people in the room is to continue the work, continue the conversations.
Just real quick,
go ahead, Dr. Smith.
Jump in there. The indoctrination is right, but the issue with the indoctrination is it naturalizes prejudice and prejudicial attitudes and behaviors. And so that's, in terms of structural change, this is what we need. We need to denaturalize those things that cause the prejudice, the prejudicial thoughts and actions, legislation, and that, in part, begins with restructuring our educational curricula.
That's what they're fighting. That's what they're fighting.
The continued fight for, I'm sorry, the static. I'm trying to make it at the right spot. The continued fight at the school board, so those of you who are not aware, there's a planned mission to put voice on school boards in Virginia, right? There is a concerted effort, organized concerted effort, well-funded concerted effort to put certain voices on the school board because they understand that the way to continue the indoctrination and the prejudicial treatment and the discrimination and the ignorance is to control what the children learn, right? So what does that mean for those of you in the room? Whether you're a parent or not, come to a school board meeting. Sign up to speak, submit a comment, support our teachers, support our principals, support our children, because just because you do not have children in the school does not mean that what happens in those schools does not affect you. What we don't want is children graduating and becoming the nuisance or the juvenile delinquent that worries you in your neighborhood, right? So then the education does matter. That's where your tax dollars are going. So whether you have children in the system or not, whether you have a teacher that you want to support or not, we still need your voices. And attending things like this is awesome, but the work starts after you walk out the door. The work continues after you walk out the door. When you're home, when you're in those circles that Ms. Jordan was just mentioned about, when you're in those meetings or in that park playing with your children, have the conversation. As awkward as it may seem to try to have that conversation, imagine a black person trying to have that conversation for you. It's just as awkward, more so. So I want to thank this first group of panelists for joining us for that first half. If you thought that was something, we've got some fire for you in the next part of the panel, where we're going to be talking about CRT, the LGBTQIA issues facing our students in schools, and this teacher tip line that our governor would like to continue to use. So at that moment, I'm going to give everyone a 10-minute break so that we can reset. I want to thank my panelists for joining. So if they're going to stick around for a little bit, so if you would like to speak to them, I know we have the radio station in the back that would like to talk to some of you, so if you guys don't mind just leaving immediately so you can go get an interview done, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. We'll take a break for about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Bathrooms are to the right around the corner.
I've got a
open. Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Okay. All right, we're about to get started again. Yeah. All right, so we're going to get started with our next topic, which is equity in education. And I have brand new panelists that are going to be outstanding and bring that fire as well. So let's start with introductions. I'm going to back up a little bit. We're going to introduce you to Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander. She is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. Professor of History Emeritus, Director of the Joseph Jenkins Roberts Center for African Diaspora Studies at another HBCU, Norfolk State University. Dr. Newby-Alexander has received numerous awards and commendations, including the William M. E. Racial Award for Best Overall Article for her 2018 article on Sarah Garland Jones. In the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography, the Distinguished Service Award on behalf of the 400 Years of African American History Commission, the Juneteenth Organization Junie Award for Outstanding Historical Research, and the 2019 Humanitarian Award from the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities. Everyone please welcome Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander. Next, we have Christine Melendez. She is the first Latina president of the Chesterfield Education Association. She has a Bachelor's of Arts in Vocal Music from Longwood University. If we ask her, she might sing for us. She holds a license to teach in Virginia with endorsements in pre-K-12, Spanish, and ESL. She has experience teaching in middle and high school setting in Lunenburg County, Fredericksburg City, and most recently here in Chesterfield County. In addition to her teaching experience, Ms. Melendez has also been involved with the Virginia Education Association and the Chesterfield community at many levels. As the current VEA District L President, she recently served as the co-chair for the VEA Minority and Women's Concerns Committee and was part of the VEA Racial and Social Justice Summit, Honesty in Education. Between worksite visits and meetings with the school board members, Christine teaches Spanish for educators to staff at elementary schools with large Spanish-speaking populations. We know that work is desperately needed. Everyone, Christine Melendez. Our next panelist is John Taylor. He is an active member of the Greater Richmond community, where the primary focus of his work has been on racial equity and reconciliation initiatives, as well as facilitated community dialogues. He is currently serving on the board of the Richmond Peace Education Center, one common unity based in Washington, D.C., and an advisory committee for the Chrysalis Institute, where he teaches mindfulness. We could use that. You're going to give us some mindfulness exercise? Okay. John's work has primarily been in the nonprofit sector, where he served for many years as at the National Office of the Presbyterian Church and as a program officer for the Bonner Foundation. John has also been a food security activist who initiated urban farming programs in Newark, New Jersey. Everyone, John Taylor. Our next panelist probably needs no introduction. Welcome, please, Senator Gonzalo Hashmi. She serves in the Virginia General Assembly, representing the 10th Senatorial District, my district, as an experienced educator and advocate who spent nearly 30 years working within Virginia's college and university system. She identifies education, equity, the environment, and healthcare access as her top legislative priorities. Senator Hashmi immigrated to the United States from India more than 50 years ago. And as an immigrant living in a small college town in Georgia, she knows firsthand how community building and fostering this dialogue can bridge the cultural and socioeconomic divisions that we face. Everyone, Senator Hashmi. Last but not least, we have Ms. Deborah Gardner. Deborah has over 30 years of public service experience, providing leadership in the areas of human services, public safety, and criminal justice. Her passion for helping people have led her to her initial career as a social worker and counselor, and later to senior executive service. Deborah has career-long success in government agency administration, serving at the helm or the chief deputy level of 3 state agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Deborah Gardner. So as I did with the first panel, this topic of conversation is related to, again, our newly elected governor has decided to not demonstrate a willingness to accept everyone in his community, everyone in the Commonwealth. So here we have CRT, critical race theory. Here we have LGBTQIA issues that have to be fought and legislated as opposed to making it a human right. And then on top of all of that, he decided to build a tattletale line to tell on our teachers if they dare to step outside of the boundaries of his executive order. So we're going to start with Ms. Melendez to give us any comments regarding the teacher tip line, her opening comments, teacher tip line, CRT, or LGBTQIA issues.
Awesome. I'm so glad I get to start. So I'm going to approach, sorry, I guess the microphone's a little off. Is that better? There we go. As the union president for the last almost year now, I think all of these issues come to a head when we talk about educators as laborers. When you think about being in the workplace, the last thing you want to do is fight to defend your own identity as a person, as a professional, and as a person who students are supposed to trust. And so things like critical race theory, like this teacher tip line, they're just mechanisms for teachers to feel like they're not valued in the workplace anymore, and for them to find other sources of income that are probably going to be twice as much as they make right now. And unfortunately, you know, we're seeing not only in the systemic defunding of the public education system, but now the systemic just disrespect and lack of value for public education for every student in our county, regardless of zip code, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of language that they speak. And so I will turn it back over and let the other panelists speak about that.
Ms. Gardner.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you guys for being here today. You could be doing many things with your Saturday afternoon, but you chose to be here and to be advocates for our kids and for our schools. And I want to thank our host for inviting me. I guess when I was preparing to come over, I was listening to Joe Biden's speech in Poland. And he started off his speech with the quote, "Be not afraid." And he said that, you know, that came from the Pope, John Paul, the Pope of Poland. But he also got that from the Bible. And I think our last panel talked about fear. But what I want to add to that is when we talk about CRT, when we talk about diversity, when we talk about equity and equality, it is about that fear. It's about, like our other panel said, it's about that indoctrination. And what we need to do, I think it's also about pulling that curtain back on the truth of that indoctrination. And I think that's where that fear stems from. It stems from the truth, and the truth hurts. So if we talk about history, if we talk about diversity, then that's going to be just like the Wizard of Oz when they pulled the curtain back. You've been lying to us. You've been lying to yourselves. You've been lying to your children. You've been lying to society, and you don't want to admit the truth. So I think that's where that fear comes from. It's from the truth really hurts. So what we have to do is band together and make those difficult conversations. When we talk about CRT, I think it was Eden who said, have you ever asked any of those people who are talking about CRT, what is CRT? If you do, they cannot tell you. It's not new. They're talking about it like it's new. It's been around for 50 years. And yes, it did start as critical legal theory, not critical race theory. But some person out there who wanted to stoke racism and fear decided, okay, this is the new boogeyman. So we're going to put out some talking points, we're going to give them a new boogeyman, and now it's critical race theory. But we need to have those conversations. And I agree with Eden when she said, we have lost that narrative. You know, you've seen my background. I actually ran for the House of Delegates in the 21 cycle. And none of us running had the answer to when people brought up CRT. Because we wanted to go out and say, well, it's not being taught in our schools. But their definition of what they've created it is being taught in our schools. And it's history, people. It's just history. And we need to address those conversations. We need to call these people out. You know, it all stems back to racism. It stems back to fear of the other, whether it's black people, brown people, LGBTQ people. It's fear of the other. And if we don't start having those conversations, I know we have allies, and we talked about that in the last panel, and most of the people here are allies, and we talk about how we're not racist. But we have to stop saying we're not racist, and we're not a racist, but we need to start being anti-racism. And when you become anti-racism, then you talk about it. Like the person said, you model it in your home. You don't shy away from going to your church and not their church. You don't shy away from saying to my friends who don't look like me, I'm not racist, but you don't talk to your friends who you know are racist. So what I would say is for us to combat some of these like new buzzwords like CRT and divisive concepts, we've got to have those difficult conversations. We've got to have them with our children. We've got to have them with our friends. We've got to have them with our families. We've got to have them with our neighbors. So with that.
Thank you, Deborah. We'll go to
You're all hearing me? Yes, good. So John Taylor, and one thing that my bio didn't have is I work for Side by Side, which you may know as RoseMe from before. It's a 31-year-old organization that works with LGBTQ, and instead of the other letters, we just say plus, because there's lots of other possibilities, right? And so I've been there since 2017, and then all those other interesting things that I've done that I've forgotten about by now. But about all of this, you know, it's very interesting because there is fear, right? And that fear is causing people to have indoctrination to kind of remain where they are. And where they are, one thing that we haven't discussed is power is very interesting because those who have it will do all that they can to hold on to it. And I think that that is where we tend to be today, right? Those with, you know, amassed so much money, those who have had a legacy in their families of having power are holding on for dear life, right? And another part of power, though, is numbers, right? So you may have dollars, but also numbers. People pulling together can create much more power itself. And part of this power, part of this fear, is to help divide people, right? So all of this divisiveness that is happening is keeping us from talking to our neighbors, right? Keeping us in our homes, keeping us away from all of this. And I think that that is a prescription, you know, as well. I've been a lifelong Democrat, and I can criticize, you know, my fellow Democrats in a way because it seems like that we've pulled away from a major base, right? We don't want to talk about working class at all. We are preferencing the very, very wealthy, our corporations, and putting our attention there, much more than looking at our entire country as well. And so I think that there is power can change, but we have to come together in order to do that. enough of that soapbox. So about the LGBTQ plus, that's here. Much of what we do is support youth in our center and now also over Zoom. And with the groups, the other part of what we do is community education. And we're out in the community. We're providing education and resources and training as well. It is evidence-based, right? We work hard to make it so. And essentially, what are we doing, right? In schools and other organizations, we're basically teaching people how to be nice, right? Teaching them how to be good, teaching them not to be afraid, right? It's, the teacher's like, oh, what about it? Like, you can let go of that. You know what to do. You know how to interrupt bullying. You can do it here as well. So that's my job, on so many bases, is to do that piece of it. And, people just want to kind of create these stories, these lies, because they're afraid, right? And we talked about mindfulness for a bit, and that bio needs to be updated. Like, Chrysalis is now the Inner Work Center, for example. I teach mindful-based stress reduction, and one of the most important things that I teach is to teach people how to face what they fear, right? Those stressors that arise, instead of running away from them, drinking them away, or Netflixing them away, or any other ways, right? Is to sit with the fear. And what happens when we do that? What looked like a mountain, turns into a plain. Those fears begin to dissipate, right? And so that kind of emotional intelligence is something that we need to bring and value as well.
Thank you,
So,
John.
yeah.
Dr. Newby Alexander.
Thank you. I'm going to approach the issue from a different perspective. Every century, we have an epiphany as a country, and we ask ourselves, whether it's conscious or not, do we want to live up to our aspirational ideals, or do we want to maintain the status quo? And each century, we answer the latter as opposed to the former. But in this 21st century, it's different than any other century we've had previously. And that difference is we have had a demographic shift. And this demographic shift has caused those who want to maintain the status quo to basically lose their minds. Our history is our history. And it does not matter how much we lie about it, run away from it, it follows us. It follows us in our physical and our cultural DNA. Our society has been a very violent society. It has taken over people's homes and destroyed communities and societies. It has engaged in human trafficking for over 300 years. And we have justified it. And we've gone to the point of trying to hide it from our public sphere rather than really acknowledging. And when you hide and you run from your past, you become, in so many ways, psychotic. And we have to make a decision. Do we want our democracy, our nation, to not only live up to its aspirational ideals, but do we want it to survive? And there are people in our country who would rather see the nation destroyed than to really live up to those aspirational ideals. And what we are seeing right now is just that. But who wants to stand in the gap? to be that voice to say enough. You know, the governor issued as his first executive order, he told everyone that the one thing he fears the most is for our Commonwealth to live up to the aspirational ideals of this nation. That is what he said in that executive order. And he wants generations to continue to be ignorant and to swim in the hypocrisy and the stereotype and the ignorance of not knowing our history. And if you don't know it, then you don't understand who your neighbors are. You don't understand what is happening right now in society and why people react and behave the way they do. And I'm not just talking about African Americans, because truly, if you have lived in a society as repressive as Virginia has been for almost 400 years, actually over 400 years, if you lived in that society, it doesn't matter if you're part of the ruling classes, you do not have a voice. You disagree with the status quo and you will be squashed just like everyone else. You are beaten into submission. You are basically made to be afraid to disagree. That's what this hotline is all about. But my question is this: so what if you get reported? Exactly what are they going to do? What law have you violated? What statute actually allows someone to go after you? And if we are people of good conscience, why isn't there a lawsuit against Executive Order Number 1? Because I would like to know what statutory law that executive order is based. Because as far as I recall, back in the 1870s, they removed all those types of laws from the books. And so exactly what statutory law is Executive Order Number 1 based? That says that you cannot teach truth, that you cannot teach knowledge, especially if it has to do with race. And so I'm going to stop right there before I get into some serious trouble.
Senator Hashmi.
Wow, good afternoon. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone who's here. I want to thank the organizers who give us this opportunity to address such serious issues. And I especially want to thank anyone who is a teacher or is a teacher adjacent at this moment. I know the teachers have borne the brunt of so much of what is happening in these culture wars in the last 2 years, 3 years, and it's been extraordinarily challenging, and I am just in awe of the courage, the resilience, and the ways in which our teachers continue to support our students. So thank you for all that hard work. I'm approaching this afternoon with a bit of a challenge because I am an academic. I see a lot of the work that I do through an academic lens. I've spent 30 years in the college classroom grappling with a lot of these issues, studying and talking about race, teaching the history through our American literature. And now I'm in a very odd position of working in government, working in politics, and seeing it from the other side, encountering these situations not as an abstract academic question or proposition, but really confronting the people who are trying to do all of these very nefarious things to our children and to education in general. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the ideas that we've already heard here. Executive Order 1, as horrible as it is, and appalling that we have a state leader who thinks that this is policy that ought to go forward in some way, but who also thinks that it is under his purview to issue an executive order of this kind. This administration faced a reality check. That executive order was translated into legislation, into a bill, both on the Senate and both on the House side this past session, and it was brought in front of our committees. And I was just telling my friend Deborah, I'm fortunate to chair the subcommittee on public education. So the Senate bill, that was the first stop when Executive Order 1 came as a bill in front of the subcommittee. I literally laughed first when I saw it, and then we promptly killed it. We recommended that it be passed by indefinitely in the subcommittee, and it was so done in the full committee and never made it to the floor of the Senate. The House bill did pass out and came to us, and again, we promptly killed it. One of the questions that I had, and I had not just for the patrons of the bill, but also to our new Secretary of Education, to our new superintendent, to the governor himself, I've asked, what are inherently divisive concepts? And there's been no answer. There's just been, they can't even provide an example. And so when we sought to interrogate that idea, what exactly are you talking about? We're really, and we know what they're talking about. These are racist dog whistles. So anything that has to do with black history, immigrant history, LGBTQ ideas, these are so-called inherently divisive concepts because they disturb a certain kind of a person. And so if you can't define what it is you're seeking to stamp down, then perhaps you ought to sit down and actually listen to people who are in the classroom. I've asked the governor directly to his face. I say, stop listening to the people who are encouraging you to continue these culture wars, who are encouraging you to campaign rather than govern, and actually start listening to educators, because the educators can tell you a whole lot of truth of what's happening in the classrooms. And if you say you're listening to parents, please tell me which parents in particular you're listening to, because you're sure not hearing the parents that I'm talking to. You're sure not hearing a whole host of parents who, first of all, value the kind of education their students are receiving, parents who want their students to have the full breadth of experience, parents who understand that the purpose of education is to challenge and is to make us uncomfortable.
Yes.
And these are the parents who I am talking to. So parents are not a homogeneous group, and I sure hope this administration begins to recognize that fact quickly and begins to listen to Virginians, because we haven't seen much of that happening lately. I am very concerned. I am concerned with the direction that we see public education going in under this administration. The very first act of the administration was to pull down the Office of Division and Equity and Inclusion, that website, all of the database that was, and the resources that had been built into that, the dashboards, all of those wonderful documentation that I know our colleges and universities, our school systems, all of our state agencies were using. All of that disappeared the very first few hours of the administration. And I asked that day, I said, what was your hurry? What were you in such a rush for? Why are you so afraid of the word equity? Because if you read the superintendent's interim report, which was issued as a result of that so-called executive order, the interim report points out every area in the Commonwealth where we use the word equity and wants it stripped out, as though that's a dangerous concept. That is frankly inherently disturbing to me, and I think it is for all of us. because equity is not a four-letter word. Equity is the word, the concept, the idea, the goal that we ought to be striving for. And so we have a lot of work to do. We cannot remain silent. We have challenges coming every day now with the efforts that are being made in this administration. And it is not a time for silence, though that is what they want us to be. There are McCarthy-like impulses. We see this in the so-called snitch line. Well, I want a snitch line for everything else that is happening. So if you see abuse in your systems, if you're in the school and you're seeing abuse against your opportunity to speak and to represent or to protect the children you care about, I want us to snitch on that. I want us to talk publicly about what we're seeing. I want the media to appropriately cover this information. I want us all to hold the administration accountable. We also need to hold ourselves accountable, because this is a moment for us to speak out against racism, to be anti-racist. And let's break that down. We don't want to be just anti-racist. We want to speak out against anti-black racism, because that in itself is something. We need to point out areas of anti-Asian racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, homophobia. All of these are part and parcel of different kinds of bigotry, but we have to speak out collectively and individually, because they hurt all of our communities in different ways. So I'll just stop there and take any questions.
So on the topic of equity, I'm going to toss this one to John first, regarding the LGBTQ community. So at a school board meeting, we've heard parents passionately afraid that a transgender student is going to walk into the girls' bathroom and pay attention to my little girl in the girls' bathroom. And she was adamant that that could happen. And her fear resonated with other parents that came and spoke to that language. How would you approach the situation where you're trying to educate a community that is fearful of what they don't understand?
That's a tough one, because, you know, gosh, dare I, did that come through? No. Dare I say the word fake? Those great sort of memes or lies that captures people's imagination, that has no fact, right? Has nothing true about it, no basis for that. Actually, what's happening with queer kids, and especially trans kids, who are the ones that are most in danger, or the most that are suffering the most, what is happening is that the moment school starts in that year, they're holding their breath, right? They are literally in fear because of all the various ways that people can come for them, right? They're also looking for support. And so they're looking for stickers or some kind of indication that there's going to be someone that's going to be there for them. So when I say stickers, like a rainbow sticker or something, you know, that's there. They're looking for language instead of, like, for example, using, I talk about my partner, who is my wife, but I talk about my partner, for example. I use my pronouns. I'm John Taylor. My pronouns are he, him, right? Various kinds of ways where they can find support. The last thing that they're talking about is getting weird in a bathroom, right? That they often can't use anyway, right? And so they're often running from one end of the campus to another to where they can use the bathroom anyway. So this is all just this made up, beautiful sort of story to cause people to freak out for no reason.
So to Christine, the teacher, that has to handle that conversation in the classroom, right? So my child wants to be identified as a boy. They want to be called Larry. How does the teacher handle that in the classroom, considering the environment that we're in? Because you have people in that classroom whose parents are like, don't you do that. Don't you tell my child anything regarding that subject. Isn't that just a very difficult arena for a teacher to navigate?
It definitely can be. As a secondary teacher, you know, I got to have a unique relationship with my students. And we got to really have some open conversations about identity, not just racial identity, but also, you know, gender identity, sexual identity. I had signs up in my classroom that helped students feel welcome because I knew that that was to help break down a barrier that was getting in the way of them learning what I had to offer as a teacher and just as a person. You know, I even had some students openly question my identity in class. And instead of shying away from the conversation and saying, oh, we can't talk about that right now because we have to focus on X, Y, and Z, I made it into a conversation. I said, well, I do identify as this, but would there be an issue if I identified otherwise? Would there, you know, and why is that? And allowing them to explore that conversation in a space where if they said the wrong thing, it's a gentle correction. It's a gentle, well, I understand where you're coming from. I have heard that before, but let's open up our thinking to, well, you know, this person identifies as this, but they're here trying to learn just like you are. And opening up that conversation in the classroom just allows students to feel like they have the permission to explore that. They may just want to explore it. They may find at the end of the day that that's not what they want to identify as and they move on to the next thing. But being able to allow students to just explore who they want to be and how they want to speak is just a small step to making sure that our students feel safe. As a Chesterfield educator, I might add that recently in the news, we saw something very unfortunate happen in the bathroom of a high school. And to be quite honest, it was in the same district as the school board representative who abstained from the vote to pass the transgender bill, to pass that policy in our county. And so, you know, we have to confront, as we continue to say, we have to confront this at every level. We have to confront that school board member and ask, okay, what are we going to do to mitigate that situation that actually did happen? How are we going to have those conversations with our students, our communities, and our parents to help them understand that it's not just one population of identity or of a person that's going to commit these things, and we need to understand overall how to have these conversations in a safe space, but in a way that educates.
And it's not by accident that sexual assault that was heterosexual sexual assault was not discussed. But had that been the population that they're trying to target, it would be everywhere, right? So the onus is on us as well to make more of those instances, to hold them accountable for those instances as well. I'm gonna toss this one to Dr. Nubi Alexander. You brought up the US Constitution. We just watched, if you had the opportunity, to watch our Senate confirmation hearings. So talk about being in a room full of mediocre white men. That was a lesson in grace, grit, class, and education all in itself. But to the point of the originalist theory and the Constitution, you had mentioned it, how do we use the document that everyone else wants to use to our advantage to help educate them, right? Because there are originalists out there that believe the Constitution should be interpreted the way the founders wrote it. But keep in mind, that document was not written with people that look like me in mind. It was not written for LGBTQ plus persons. It was technically written for 21-year-old white male landowners. Okay, that is what that document protects. But I believe in using the tools of the oppressor to educate. So can you enlighten a little bit on how we can take that document and use it to help push the critical race theory concepts? Like, this is how we get there. We're going to use your document.
You know, a lot of people forget that there was a thing called a fugitive slave clause in the original Constitution. So you want to not talk about race, but you want to be an originalist with the Constitution. I'm having a hard time just understanding, conceptualizing this schizophrenic mindset, but it actually is part of America. I've done a lot of research and writing on the Underground Railroad in Virginia, and one of the things that has struck me so much is that when we talk about Virginia's industries, we talk about tobacco, but tobacco was not Virginia's primary industry. Virginia's primary industry was human trafficking. And we hide in plain sight the reality. We don't talk about and list in the census records and in the city directories and county directories. We don't list people as slave traders. We call them euphemistic terms, merchants, and just traders in general. We had slave jails and slave markets that never had an address identified. We would put it in newspapers and say, oh, take them to the slave jail, but never say where, because everyone knew where it was. It was in the center of town, because the center of town was the center of commerce. And so we have had this difficult relationship with truth and reality in our society. And it began with our Constitution, where we try to talk about these aspirational ideals. But the Constitution, basically, while it applied to everybody in the country, it only empowered less than 10% of the population. So all these people, you know, it's just like people who want to imagine themselves on an antebellum plantation when they love to get married, and or, you know, be part of some sort of antebellum ball. And I remind people, you would not be there. I don't know what your fantasy is or why you have that particular fantasy, but you would not be there, because you are not part of that 1% who would actually be there. Not only that, but that plantation is fictional as well, because if you look at most of the plantations during that time, they were small farms. So I don't know where people get these ideas except through the media. Our culture as a society has perpetrated a lot of lies, a lot of illusions, a lot of delusions, and a lot of stereotypes. And the biggest one has to do with our Constitution. I would venture to say that probably only about 10% of our population has actually read the Constitution. And those who are clamoring for certain things in the Constitution the most are the ones who have not read the Constitution, because they could not possibly say the things that they say about having an original idea. Let's go back to this original concept. And I know Justice Scalia was one of the first people, and I want to say, I'm sorry, sir, you would definitely not have the Constitution apply to you. And so I'm really having a difficult time with ignorance, and with intentional ignorance for political one-upsmanship. But I would, thank you, but I would say the most important thing is that people of good conscience, people who understand, people who know, have to stop being afraid to speak out. Fear is a killer of dreams, is a killer of the potential, and it can be the killer of our society. And so this notion that people want to go back to the original concepts of the Constitution. Think about this. Now, the Constitution's ink was not even dry before amendments were added. And those amendments explained how to apply the Constitution. So we have a Supreme Court, but it wasn't even called a Supreme Court in the original document. It really wasn't until Marbury versus Madison, I'm starting to get legal now here, but it wasn't until that particular court case in the 19th century that told us how the courts are going to operate. And so we have a document that had no operational guide. It was President George Washington who created a part of an operational guide. But the original Constitution did not even have a real governmental structure associated with it. And so when people say that, what they want to do is eliminate people's rights. Whenever they say that, and I remind them, you know what, shoulda, coulda, woulda. That's a shoulda, coulda, woulda. We're not there. We are centuries past that point. If you want to go back to that time, please invent a time machine and go back and live in that time, and I guarantee you, you will not enjoy that time because you will not be one of those privileged individuals. Where we are right now, because the Constitution was written to have amendments, the very concept and ideology behind the Constitution was to change, was to adapt, was to correct. And so if we talk about and celebrate the incredible brilliance behind the Constitution, and we want to ignore the very fabric of how the Constitution was supposed to change, was supposed to adapt, was supposed to expand, then we really do not know what that Constitution said. It's important in the classroom to teach students this. I don't know why we want to go and create a George Orwellian 1984 world or an autocratic world where the idea of freedom is only defined by a few people. And it's freedom to do what I want you to do. That's not freedom. And so I would like for people to realize that your freedoms are being conscripted. Your freedoms are being challenged. I know that our young people especially are, and our society in general is caught up in entertainment. But you know, there are a lot of apocalyptic entertainment movies and films out there. Which one do you want to live in? Because they're all scary. And so the world I want to live in is one in which my freedom should not be intruded on by your freedom. And in a cooperative society, you have to find that middle ground. And that middle ground does not mean that you have the freedom to keep history from being taught, or to keep my identity from being a part of our world and our society. For so long, Virginia especially has tried to create two races of people, white and black. And I have news for everybody. Virginia hasn't been white or black since 1619. Because people intermingle, and they have been intermingling for over 400 years. And even before the first Africans were forced to come to Virginia, the white men here were intermingling with the women, the native women. And so the reality is different than this artificial construct that we have in our world and our society. And it's important that we not only acknowledge that, but we talk about it. We have our children know that history so that we can live in the civil society together.
Thank you. tossing this question over to Deborah and Senator Hashmi, the legislative aspect of it, we shouldn't have to legislate good conscience, right? You talked about the things that you're having to fight in Congress that are coming, in the General Assembly that are coming to you. What is it that you need the people in this room to do to help you with that battle? Because we have an election every year in Virginia, right? So we have our opportunity, but what else can we do, Senator Hashmi, to get you what you need to help fight the good fight?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of the folks who are in this room are already very, very much involved in that good fight, because I certainly see you in the halls of the General Assembly. I see you during session, and you are speaking out in our committee meetings and representing the good fight. So we need more of that, though, because the other side is quite loud and quite aggressive in delivering their message and making sure that they are getting the national public and the media attention. And we want to make sure that we have all of the full representation of points of view adequately expressed. And so being intrinsically involved in the legislative process, identifying those harmful bills, particularly those bills that are going to impact your community or the people that you love and care about, and then speaking out with courage to address that is really what we need. And I know it takes a lot of courage. I have personal friends who are involved in this, and particularly during session this past year, we saw very transphobic bills attacking trans children in our school system, even though we have a Department of Education policy now to protect trans children. There were attempts to dismantle those policies, and those attempts were those attempts came with bigotry. The people who spoke in support of those transphobic bills really came to speak about their own bigotry against trans children. And I have friends who brought their trans children to the General Assembly. What courage it takes, first of all, for the family to step out publicly to do that. But what broke my heart was that a child has to do that. A child has to come in front of adults and ask for their dignity, for their human right, for their representation, for the acknowledgement of who and what they are. And that is not a burden that we should be putting on our children. That is something that we as adults ought to have the courage to do. And I think the more that we are able to address it, to speak it, to shine light upon it, the more the way we will be able to create that kind of inclusive society, because I know there are far more good people in this world than there are those who try to oppress and take away the rights of others, and so we need to hear your voices.
Thank you. Deborah, you're strong in the community, organizing them for your campaign. You were out there knocking on doors, beating the streets. What else can we do to have these conversations a little bit more often, or reach an audience that really doesn't want to hear what we have to say? How do we can you talk to a little bit to how we break down those barriers that you were talking about before?
Sure, thanks, Dominique. But first, I just wanted to add to what the doctor just said. I think there's been a glorification of the, quote, founding fathers. When we talk about them, or when some people talk about them, it's just so glorious. But we forget that 27 of the 56 of the founding fathers were slave owners who trafficked them, who sold them, who kept them in bondage. So why would we think that the documents that they wrote would ever have any application to us? So I just think we need to learn our history, and she also touched on 1619. And when people talk about critical race theory, that's the next thing they say, 1619. How many of you in here, and you don't have to raise your hand, read the book or read the 1619 Project? It's history. It's not, you've not heard any of those people complaining about it ever saying that it was wrong. And that's because it told the truth about history. So in order to combat some of these misinformations and some of these talking points, we have got to arm ourselves with knowledge and the education of what really is truth and what is not truth. And that goes back to what my colleague said about fake news. We've got to start combating that and just saying, it's just wrong, you're just not telling the truth. And when you talk about what we should do, I knocked, I don't know how many doors during the campaign, and I was kind of disheartened with people who I knocked on their doors. And a lot of those people were, quote, allies, our Democratic supporters, who have such apathy. I don't know where it came from. I don't know, I don't have the answer as to how to change that or make it better. But, you know, Dr. Faison talked about being tired. Well, I'm a 65, almost 66-year-old black woman who's really tired of fighting the same battles over and over again. And, you know, we all know the saying. It's all right to clap about that because I'm sure you guys are tired of it too. You know the saying that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get different results. We have got to break that cycle of insanity that we are finding ourselves in, waiting for somebody else to speak up for us, waiting for somebody else to be the savior for us, waiting for, I don't know what, to fall from the sky and say, okay, everybody's gonna wake up, we're gonna sing Kumbaya, and this world is gonna be a great place. It is not, people. We are gonna have to do it ourselves. So what I say is, we have got to realize that because we made progress, we can't sit back and rest on those laurels. We have got to continue the fight. I thought the fight was over. I mean, I grew up in segregated South where I didn't go to integrated schools until the 7th grade. I was a part of separate but equal. Listen, people, it is not. And so when we talk about what they're doing in our schools today and wanting to segregate, you know, that's what charter schools are. They're wanting to segregate kids again. You know your history, know what they're saying when they use these buzzwords. They're trying to make a better society for them and not us. And us is the majority of the people that we live with. So what I would say is, and I did when I knocked these doors, it's like half the people didn't even know their election. Elections have consequences. So we have got to educate ourselves as to who we're putting into office. I think a lot of those parents who were for parents' rights have a whole lot of regret for electing Governor Young. And I hate to say this, but you get what you deserve when you don't do anything. So what I would say to the answer to your question is, we have got to wake up. We have got to realize that nobody's going to come to save us but us. And we've got to get out here. We've got to talk to our kids. We've got to get our young people involved because I don't know how many, I have a 21-year-old daughter, and I don't know how many of her friends I've talked to who says, that stuff doesn't have anything to do with me. It has to do with all of us. And if we don't start waking up and taking our responsibility and doing it ourselves, it's not going to get done. And we're going to be destined to repeat that history of being right back where we started, in that cycle of insanity.
Thank you, Deborah. So the theme from the first group was fear and indoctrination. The theme in the second group is education, right? They all go together. In order for us to have a successful, inclusive community, we have to break the indoctrination, kill the fear through education, right? So I know we said this before, we're preaching to the choir in this room. but just an example real quick before we wrap up. The white ally. Some of you might follow me on Facebook or Instagram or not, but I posted a quote, and I read it at the school board meeting. Some of the people who are against equity like to quote Dr. King often. And as Dr. Faison said, context is important. What goes before that sentence and after that sentence is important. So in the Letters from a Birmingham Jail, he talks about the white ally, and that the white ally might be the detriment to what he was trying to achieve. And what was he trying to say to that? I had a conversation with a white friend of mine. I call them my work mom, right? She was awesome. She has always been awesome. I've known her for 12 years. We went to lunch and we were having a conversation, and I started crying during the conversation, listening to the words that were coming out of her mouth that she didn't fully understand what she was saying and how it affected me. And what I want you to understand is that I should not be the exception to the rule, right? Often black people are always told, you know, you're very articulate. I just want you to know, just in case you did not know, you're hearing it from a black friend, that is a microaggression. Please do not tell an educated black person that they... Because what that is saying, if you look up the definition of the word articulate, it's the ability to communicate a thought. Children can communicate a thought. So you're telling me that you're impressed by my ability to communicate a thought. She didn't understand, because I could see it in her eyes when she saw me crying, the words that were coming out of her mouth and her inability to understand that what she was saying impacted just beyond me and not just me. She was hurt by what she was saying to me. So she's not a Karen, I gave it a new name, it's Betty, right? So Betty is your white ally who is at the fight with you, at the marches with you, advocating next to you, but still not aware of what's going on around them. When I brought up the charter bill, when I brought up Governor Youngkin's Executive Order number 1, when I brought up the whitewashing of history, she was oblivious to that actually happening. Because the circle that you're in is all that you know, right? So on this list of what we can do, I need you to get up and find another circle. I need you to get up and go to a different place. I said at a school board meeting, I need those representatives to go to a different school and meet some different people. Christine was mentioning she teaches ESL and Spanish for teachers. I'm bilingual. The school that my children go to has a significantly heavy Hispanic population. How many people in that building do you think speak Spanish? One. One person. And do you know that these teachers are using Google Translate to try to communicate to their parents and their students? That is terrible. Number 2, open up. Have an open mind and be open to these conversations. Both panels have said it's going to be uncomfortable. And if it's uncomfortable, then you know you're doing the right thing. Because it's not meant to be easy in your spirit. It's meant to stir you up. It's meant to make you cringe when you hear those words coming out of the person that you consider a friend, their mouths. 3rd, speak up. Senator Hashmi already said it. We've heard everyone else say it. We have to speak up. You can no longer sit silently on the sidelines. If you follow me, you hear me say that all the time. It's time to get in the game. We can't afford any more sidelines. We can't. So if you're for us and about us, and I say us inclusively, black, brown, LGBTQ, because we need all those voices. We cannot do it alone. And the last one, lift up. We can't, there's enough success and prosperity in our country for everyone to win. And this concept that only one group can win is a lie. As you reach one and you teach one, lift up another one. Spend the time it's going to take to lift up each other, because only together can we get through this. And I know that everyone is not a, but I'll just say that there's a part that talks about faith without works. So for everyone who's waiting on Jesus to fix everything, I hear you. I hear you. But what are you doing to help Jesus out? Because he's got a lot of stuff to do, okay? So let's follow the get up, open up, speak up, lift up, so that we can get past some of these things and thrive. Because we can't do it alone, we have to do it together. I want to thank everybody for their time, for coming out this afternoon. I know we went long, but you saw the fire from our panelists. Thank you for watching on YouTube. Thank you for the church. Pastor John, thank you for letting us be here in your church, in your sanctuary, and the organizers. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the drive home.